Why not? Andrew Rothemel on Bravo versus, hey, we saw this yesterday, Alexander Vore on Kano. Let's get real. 7-0 versus 7-0. This is it. One will stand tall at the end of this.
And there's a big difference here, Flake, in the way we saw this go before. Everyone just completely unprepared. I'm not going to say that Andrew Rothemel had a clear target on Kano, but at least there's some Shock Charmers here to go along with those Null Rune Boots. So Shock Charmers, of course, Spell Void 2, Null Rune Boots, able to do some Arcane Barrier. So there's some options here. And I want to note Talismanic Lens on the part of Alexander Vore. I casted a lot of Kano yesterday. I'm not sure if I did Alexander's matches or not. Was he playing Talismanic Lens the whole time, or was he on the Ragamuffins hat that we saw some of the other players play?
I believe I saw some Talismanic Lens. Again, Talismanic Lens allowing you to just opt to.
Yeah,
and
nice and simple.
Very clutch. It's not flashy. A lot of people just throw this card in the garbage when they open it because who the hell cares about opting to? Kano cares about opting to.
Yeah, and so it seems that Alexander Vore, separate from the contingent of players, kind of the Arsenal Pass crew that we saw yesterday, Brendan Patrick, Hayden Dale, alongside. Excuse me, I'm forgetting the name of the person previously. Sasha Markovich. I'm sorry, Sasha. Don't worry. By the end of the day, everyone will know your name and will not forget it. Two-time calling champion. How could I forget his name for even a second?
The OG.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Reverberate into Reverberate, starting to push through with some damage. Again, like you mentioned, Null Rune Boots is a good start. Yeah. But we saw how just absolutely naked and afraid you can be if you do not have enough Arcane Barrier. It was just, you kind of just giving Kano just a free lane to just throttle up and go. And in this case, Shock Charmers, Spell Void versus Arcane Barrier, one's kind of just a one and done. And, but it's still helpful because we've seen how important stopping early arcane damage can be and how it can pile on and snowball. So when do you think that is a good time for that Shock Charmer to occur?
Yeah, so Flake, they're two different tools. Null Rune Boots is about sort of stemming the bleeding. When you have extra resources, you can invest in that and just generally prevent arcane damage from really messing up your day. Shock Charmers is going to be for a specific situation. In particular, you saw those huge Ether Wildfire turns yesterday, where the damage from Ether Wildfire persists through the rest of the turn. If you blunt that by one, that's something. You know, usually there's the Metacarpus node, there's the Crucible of Aetherweave, all playing into it, so it's dealing typically 6 damage is what it's trying to add to the rest of the stuff. You pump one Arcane Barrier into it, you reduce it to 5, and you probably die anyway. However, you have those Shock Charmers ready, you apply those to the Ether Wildfire, that's a big difference that ripples throughout the rest of the turn. And I think it gives you more of a fighting chance than we saw from so many other of these Starvos yesterday that were just getting blown out by this Kano technology. Now,
this is great. Spinal Crush. You'd think that this could be an absolutely devastating blow to any kind of hero that wants to do multiple things. But Alex Vore looks at Go Again and laughs because everything is basically done within those margins of priority. It's one stacking on top of another, all within the same action point. Go Again means absolute butt kiss in this case. It's just a matter of stacking all those instant speed reactions going through. So really, what was Spinal Crush? Spinal Crush was just 9 damage. That's just all damage. It was.
But you know what, Flake? That matters from the Bravo side. That's what really matters here is they need to race. They need to push out the damage as fast as possible. The more time you give Kano, the more they set up their arsenal, the more they get their Faendal Spring Tunic online, the more they're able to deploy things like Energy Potion. All those things matter so much. Interesting setup here for Alexander. We see some cards floating to the Banish Zone with the Kano ability, Gaze the Ages and Zap. Now, Gaze the Age is going to be very interesting in conjunction with that Zap. Basically going to get another blue into hand for free. And you see Crucible of Aetherweave now activated by Alexander. What's the follow-up here? Time for an Ether Flare. So that's going to look to do a little opt-in, set up the top of the deck, going to respond to that with Gaze the Ages and take a peek at the top of that deck.
And again, Gaze the Ages, being able to recur a card back into your hand, and not only that, but use it as resources. Again, we saw this in the previous game. Cards that are able to do multiple things at once. Attack and recover some life points.
And I want to correct myself here, Flake. I said Ether Flare, going to go ahead and opt. I was incorrect. That's Ether Spindle that opts. Ether Flare is the damage one. So this is about pushing damage through. 4 damage headed the way of Andrew Rothemel. And this is the first test for Andrew. This is a moment. I mentioned Ether Wildfire as the card you generally want to point those Shock Charmers to. Well, now Andrew has to think, wait a second, what happens if I let this Ether Flare go through? You know that Gaze of the Age is heading back to hand, going to provide Alexander with more resources. So a really critical junction already in this matchup for Andrew.
My man, it's all right. You can make mistakes. I mean, frankly, that card could have been Aether or either one of them.
Yeah.
So it could have been Aether this or Aether that.
Either this, either that. Absolutely anything.
All right, Crown of Seeds is going to soak up 1 damage. The beauty of Crown of Seeds, again, it's not just preventing a specific type of damage, it's any damage. So that is going to be helpful as well.
Good rip here from Alexander. Tome of the Aetherwind revealed to Kano. That's going to put 2 fresh cards in hand. And I don't think this is what Alexander necessarily intended when this turn started. Didn't really know where it was going to go, just looking to push through a little damage. But it's developed very quickly into a promising looking hand.
The Bravo player here, obviously starting with a little bit more life, starting at 40 versus Kano's 30. Alexander Vore already at 21. You know, the way that Kano plays very much, that life total is merely just a reminder of how much runway you have left in this game. It's just a matter of being able to, how patient can I be to pull things together. Eventually, you get to a point where they present lethal, and that's when the fireworks occur. The way that I kind of equate this is that the last turn or so of a Kano match is like the last 2 minutes of a basketball game. You know, they last like 20 minutes.
Yep.
So that's how it goes. Andrew Rothemel here knows that eventually he'll get to a point where he might be able to present lethal, and then it's just put your cards down and we wait and we see. Because that is how it goes. It becomes a photo finish in more cases than not.
Yeah, it looks like Alexander found some reds off that tome, slowed down the hand a little bit, had to pitch that Ether Spindle, as well as the Aether Wildfire. So, brakes put on, just going to go ahead, fire off that Zap, benefit from the additional damage being added by the Ether Flare, and just look to reduce Andrew's life total small amounts, get those plink damage in, setting up for that massive salvo at the end of the game.
And this is what I love about this game sometimes, is just how different a lot of these heroes play. You know, we just saw a ranger that plays from the arsenal and fires arrows. We're looking now at a wizard that's, you know, tossing arcane damage at instant speed. We see the big hammer of the Guardian as well. It's such an impressive game.
And the thing, Flake, I mean, not to just sit here and gush for a while, but the thing that always stands out to me is how accurate the feel of all these heroes are. You feel like a wizard when you're playing Kano. You feel like a ranger when you're pew-pewing arrows all over the place. You feel like a big, strong guardian playing Bravo, and it just captures the essence of all these heroes so well in their mechanics.
All right, so here comes a break ground red. That's going to be 7 damage. There was no fusion on this. I think Andrew is a little bit... If you want to succeed in this matchup as Starvo, you either need to pack in an arcane lantern or something along those lines, which Andrew doesn't have. Obviously, he's bringing a shield that's literally just extra luggage in this on this journey. But you need to have those fusions because you need to be able to chain together multiple attacks. If you're not chaining together like a 9 dominate go again, the dominate means nothing. It's just the amount of damage that you can push through, and that hammer on top with the frostbite is so key because it creates a blue pitch into a blue +1, and that is, you know, honestly, a little bit awkward. But now it's back to Kano's turn, if that even matters in this case.
Yeah, turns are pretty irrelevant when it comes to Kano.
It's an abstract concept.
Yeah, you do what you want when you want. Going to go ahead and start off our turn right now with the snapback revealed to Kano. That's a nice one. Pitching Energy Potion, Crucible activated, and here is another Ether Flare. So again, looking to amplify the damage throughout the turn. A little bit different than we've seen Kano's play thus far. Just really on his own turn is Alexander pushing through damage, and it shows the adaptability of Kano. At some point, we're going to see a Kano block a bunch too. And I know that seems weird given how much their damage output is, but they do have the potential. They have a lot of 3 blocks in the deck, and sometimes they turtle up for a while. They find resources. They'll pitch stack if they have to go super long against someone, you know, say an Oldhim that actually does have really good defensive capabilities against them. So many lines of play for Kano, and that's what's going to really determine how Kano fares at the end of this event. Are there players who have that mastery, can find those secondary game plans, and not just have those massive combo turns into someone who's frankly unprepared for the deck with no arcane barrier?
Worth noting as well is that the Shock Sharpers are not necessarily just Spell Void 2, which is a big part of it, but if you're missing out on those fuses and not generating those go-agains, being able to pitch some of those cards that are otherwise useless just to trickle in for a little bit more. Kano's already coming in at 30. Every extra point of damage is a significant chunk of the pie, late game, right? So I think that it's quite important to note as well that Shock Charmers can definitely present a little bit more threat, a little bit more utility for the cards that are otherwise potentially just rotting in your hand.
No, I think you're exactly right, Flake. And it also allows you to filter your hand, too, because it's an instant ability that you can use at any point. So if there's something that doesn't line up well, or if you need to go ahead and search for something for your next turn. Granted, you're not getting much value out of it in those scenarios, but still, just having the right pieces in a critical juncture can matter a lot. Interesting hand here from Andrew. It looks like we have a Pulse of Volthaven combined with a Icy Encounter and a Pummel in hand. So if all this stuff can be put together, might be able to push through 8 damage with a Frostbite here. I'm not sure about the pitch values on the Lightning and Ice cards here. So I don't know if we can quite put together the perfect hand here. There is a Tunic activation that could maybe smooth things out a little bit. So let's see how Andrew wants to play this one.
Yeah, well, the Icy Encounter is your biggest threat here. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to wait. I think that's fine because Pummel, like you mentioned, it's a red Pummel. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's definitely a big deal, but what are you going to connect it with? It's got to be with something that, it might be a situation where Andrew's comfortable at 25. Maybe he's looking for the big play, and that could be a potential.
Maybe. I could also see trying to pummel your club here to force through damage should there be any kind of blocks. I could also just say I want to use as much of my hand as possible, and you do see yellow pummel in this case going to be applied to this Winter's Wail, forcing through just an extra bit of damage here. And when you put that pummel in your deck, you intended it to do more. It wasn't just supposed to be 3 to the dome. That's what we got here, and sometimes you take what you get.
All right, well, in this case, Alex is at 10, but it doesn't matter. Not until Lethal is presented is he really going to be worrying about this, but he does have work to do. 25 life is still a tall hill to climb. What I've been very intrigued about in this tournament is just everybody's iteration of what Starvo should look like at this case, because Shock Charmers we haven't really seen it much in many others. We've seen lists that run, we saw an Imposing Visage, and everybody has their own idea of those tech cards, those extra spices that they're going to sprinkle on.
Let me tell you what a lot of players are playing that Shock Charmers for, Flake. I spoke to some players yesterday. Shock Charmers is intended for chain, actually. I know that's weird, but what they're trying to do is control their Spellbound creepers. And so on a turn where they activate their Rosetta Thorn and push through that arcane damage, that's when they apply the Shock Charmers and blow up Spellbound creepers. However, turns out Kano's a big deal at this tournament, so you may as well have the Shock Charmers for that as well.
Why not? Works for me. So
time for a Sonic Boom here from Alexander. This could be a big play depending on what's on top. It's going to be amplified by that Crucible. And again, I think Andrew put to the test a little bit, had the opportunity for some Shock Charming, ultimately decided not to. And I think Alexander maybe didn't find anything worthwhile from that Sonic Boom.
So again, Sonic Boom is, for whatever it connects with, it's going to give a discount based on that arcane damage that's coming through. And oftentimes when Lethal is around the corner, these are one of those cards that you want to absorb as much damage for potentially as well to maybe, curtail some of the next card that's going to come through. But also, like you mentioned, Aether Wildfire, like that is probably what Shock Charmers is going to look to gobble up.
Yeah, so what that tells me about that turn, Alexander revealed a non-wizard card when he hit that Sonic Boom, and that's a really, really big deal for Alexander. A huge downshift in output. My guess is probably something like an Energy Potion. And look at this Tome of Harvest on the part of Andrew Rothemel. Oh, now I need to know if there's an Earthlord bounty there. I'm gonna tackle this guy after this game and get some information. You don't see a lot of Tome of Harvest just floating around raw Starvo lists.
This is what you need if you
this
are
is huge from Andrew.
If you're a Starvo player and you've seen the Kanos just absolutely eviscerating the field, this is what you're hoping for. You're hoping for a Starvo fuse into an Okanold fuse. This is how you really push the tempo, because now you're putting pressure on a player like Alexander Vore here, who knows that this is an 11 coming through with a detrimental on hit. So Alexander is in a position now where, okay, if I'm going to lose cards, I'm going to play them, because I can at instant speed, but I'm still going to be chunking a lot of damage here, and that is not what I want to be doing here. So,
well, you see the plan reflected with the activation of this Talismanic Lens. Alexander says it's time to invest some resources. Either try to kill Andrew, always a possibility when you're playing against Kano, or take some time, find a decent amount of damage here, draw up on the next turn, because you're not facing Lethal now, you're facing 9. So you're able to weather this hit. The problem is follow-up is probably lethal. You have the Winter's Wail coming, so.
I think, well, there was a Starvo.
There's a Starvo fuse
yeah,
as well,
Starvo
so you're
fuse
facing
on top.
11 here. You are correct, Flake. So,
yeah.
So this is go time for Alexander. This is him trying to find the kill in this moment.
It has to be, because if you can't just stuff this Okinold, you've got the Hammer Chaser coming through right afterwards. And let's be real, it's not just the 18. It's the 18 plus the fact that Alex has 2 blue cards in hand that can go ahead and eat up a lot of the arcane over time, plus the Shock Charmers. So it is such a massive undertaking here, but we've seen Alexander. I'm sure Alexander's been in this position many, many times, probably even in this tournament, and has pulled it off. 7-0 records. He has basically, Wizard players live on that razor's edge of winning games and losing games. That's where they're basically played, because it's very rare that a Wizard player will just cleanly win a game, and we've seen it on stream, but at this is the juncture where lethal is presented. It's time to get funky. Let's get creative.
No, it always comes down to this type of situation as the Wizard player, and you see Alexander just grinding out the numbers right now, asking, if I leave either of these 2 cards on top, is it lethal, or do I just have to roll the dice and see what I can find and try and get lucky with that Kano activation? I promise you, this is not the first time Alexander's been in this situation. It will not be the last time he's in this situation. Has to figure out, though, exactly how to respond to this Okinold.
All right, so Andrew, right now, again, like I said, you're a passenger. You're a spectator in this game. You basically presented your lethal, you've presented your big move, and now you sit back and you watch the numbers crunching in Alexander's head. You can hear the gears turning, the
But
smoke.
do you know why this is so hard for him, Flake? It's because of those Shock Charmers. I know it's just Spell Void 2. That doesn't seem like it should alter everything. But in this scenario, it changes all of the math for Alexander. He has to ask, when is Andrew going to apply that 2 Spell Void? What of my spells is going to be just absolutely blocked off? And you know, Wizard damage, it's multiplicative. You combine it with Blazing Ether, the Ether Wildfires, all of these effects, they add on to each other. So any disruption in that chain does absolute havoc on your math. And that's why we see Alexander struggling with this decision so much.
You know, you're absolutely right. Again, those Shock Charmers are not just Spell Void 2. It's Spell Void 2 and everything after that. And the math just got harder. You've added extra variables to this equation, and Alexander's got a little bit of time to figure this out, obviously.
Yeah, now he's looking at the graveyard saying, if I bin these, I put these on the bottom, what other options are left in my deck? What do I have to play towards? Calculating the outs. These are the moments that Kano players are born for. These are such difficult decisions. Anyone picking up this deck, say you saw Kano's success yesterday and you've signed yourself up for the calling. You're saying, I'm a Kano player now, and you've never been in this spot before. Good luck. Good luck, Flake. I mean, it takes an absolute master to get through these scenarios.
But dude, let's also talk about the fact that you've got a loaded tunic and an arsenal for the Crown of Seeds, so you can stuff 4 off of the top.
That's a great point, Flake.
That's crazy.
Really good options here.
And you're drawing another card that you could potentially then again donate to Arcane Barrier. It's ridiculous how well positioned Andrew is to have this massive turn. It is the dream turn for Andrew in this case. Picking up the double fuse, the super fuse, that's you, the super fuse to Okinold to drop in and just really show it. So this is it.
We're going for it.
We're going for it. We have to. It's all systems go. It's time for launch. We're going to see just how much damage this Kano player, Alexander Vore at 7-0, can push through while staring down the barrel of a double fused Okinold.
Yeah, step 1, activate Storm Striders, get instant for your next Wizard ability this turn. Juice it up a little bit with Crucible. I mean, this is such a hard position to present lethal through, Flake. That Shock Charmers, the Null Rune Boots, the Crown of Seeds, all lining up perfectly here for Andrew. And there's the Ether Wildfire, and this is almost certainly going to spur Andrew into action. You cannot let this arcane damage leak through.
Yeah, and there it goes again. This last turn is always takes a lot. That's why I like to call Kano the Wizard of Pause, because he just takes, there's this sort of freeze motion on the game as everyone thinks. The Wizard of Pause has to take his time and think about things. So Aether Wildfire coming in for 5, but like we mentioned, that can get stuffed for 4 with the Tunic into the Crown, with the Arcane Barrier boots, with the Null Rune boots, with the Shock Charmer Spell Void 2. This Aether Wildfire, which usually is the first domino to fall in a terrible situation for whoever's at the receiving end, can get really muffled here by just the protection that Andrew has in his equipment.
Yeah, so I want to point something out, Flake. I think you see the players being super deliberate with their timing. I mean, timing is everything when it comes to Kano. You need to understand exactly who has priority, where you're on the stack, what abilities are on the stack, what has been activated. Thus far, Metacarpus node has not been activated in this case. That means Aether Wildfire has not been pushed to 6 damage. It's pushed to 5 damage with the addition of that Crucible of Aetherweave. Now, I don't know if that's the end result. It's possible that Metacarpus node activation is still on the stack right now. We don't have a visual representation of that. But if I'm Andrew and I see Alexander not using that Metacarpus node, I'm actually more concerned, because that means he's not pushing through the additional 2 damage with the Aether Wildfire that's going to play for the rest of the turn. It means he has a plan for that other resource. What's the plan? Is it to do something even more devastating? Is it just to activate Kano again and pray? You don't know if you're Andrew. I think regardless, you're going to just throw everything at this Aether Wildfire. It doesn't affect your play here. It would affect my mind state, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of discourse going on, again, discussion about what's exactly going on. Much in the previous game, 2 fatigue shots, how do they stack up? In this case, where are my windows? What are the priorities? What's being presented here? And I think, as you can see, now it's to Andrew to figure it out. And there is the activation of the Crown of Seas. We got to turn 3,
yep,
which
going to get a little bit more information here.
Yep. So we're going to go ahead. That's going to soak up 1 damage. Andrew's going to draw a card. Now he's got 3 cards in hand. Spell Void 2 and Null Rune Boots to basically close out this game. I mean, oftentimes it's like your Kano's like this rabid Wolverine. You're backing it into a corner, and when it feels the most threatened, that's when it's the most explosive and dangerous, and that's exactly what we're seeing right here.
A perfect analogy, Flake. That's exactly how Kano plays, and that's why you see such trepidation from Andrew. If you're watching, you're like, well, given all the explanation we've given, how much arcane barrier there is here, how hard this Aether Wildfire is apparently going to get stuff, you'd think he'd feel pretty good. You never feel good when you're playing against Kano. You never know what they're capable of.
I just feel like I have, not that I don't know what the hell's going on, I just feel like sometimes I am not in control. Oftentimes if I'm giving cards for defense and this and that, but oftentimes I don't even think that Alexander feels completely in control either. It's the Aether, controlling this fiery wizardry. You're never truly in control.
I want to break down where we are now, Flake. Here's my interpretation of the chain, the combat chain. I guess it's not a combat chain in this case. This is my interpretation of the stack. Aether Wildfire is still on the stack, has not resolved. Crown of Seas fired off. Before that Aether Wildfire resolves, we're now looking at a Kano activation. Kano activation revealed Reverberate. Reverberate was fired on the spot. This Reverberate is now on the stack, going to resolve before that Aether Wildfire does.
So the Crown of Seeds is going to soak up the Reverberate,
correct,
making the Aether Wildfire a little bit more potent.
That's exactly right. And it also leads to a whole new set of questions for Andrew. And I don't envy either player's position right now with these massive stakes at 7-0 at the first ever Flesh and Blood Pro Tour, trying to figure out exactly how to navigate a very tense situation.
Okay, so then Alex will then play the Reverberate to soak up the Crown of Seeds damage through that. Then he'll go to the to go and look behind the Declaration of Independence, okay? And behind that might be another source of arcane damage. Now, if you can go ahead and steal that, you might be able to, in conjunction with the Force. Okay, now hear me out.
It's getting a little complicated, but I'm with you so far.
All right, now hear me. This is basically my understanding of Kano. So I'm doing my best here, and so is Alexander Vore, but that is a very nifty play, again, like you mentioned, to sort of negate the absorption of the Crown of Seeds damage to make sure that that Aether Wildfire, which is the first domino, is as potent as possible.
Yeah, and it looks like Andrew going to go ahead, spend those Shock Charmers now, apply Arcane Barrier 1. That means, I believe, 2 Aether Wildfire damage leaking through. That's going to apply for the rest of the turn. Now, that Reverberate has resolved. I do not believe the second ability, where you may banish a wizard non-attack action from your hand with cost less than or equal, was used. I think that was passed on. So, what does that mean? I believe only 1 card